Good afternoon. I call to order now the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today's order of the day is pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the study of the Mulroney Airbus settlement. Our first witness is Mr. Norman Spector, former Secretary to the Cabinet for Federal-Provincial Relations from August 1986 to 1990, when he became Chief of Staff to then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. In 1992, he was appointed Ambassador to Canada to Israel and High Commissioner to Cyprus. In August 1995, he returned to Canada when he was appointed by then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien as President of the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. Good afternoon, Mr. Spector.
Good afternoon.
On December the 15th, 2007, the committee provided me with a list of priority witnesses to be called in regard to our study. Your name was included among them, and we thank you for accepting our invitation to appear before us today. I would now ask the Assistant Clerk to please swear in the witness.
The evidence I shall give
on this examination
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Thank you, sir. As you know, the matter before us is very serious, and I hope that you will not feel any undue influence in what you believe to be relevant and vital for the committee to hear. We expect you to clarify and or to help us to better understand certain matters brought before the committee. Refusal to answer a question is not an option. However, if you believe, sir, that there is any valid reason that a question should not be answered, I will hear your argument and make a ruling. As a courtesy to our translators, I ask you not to speak too quickly. I will give you all the time that you need to make your full statement before we proceed to questions from the committee members. Do you have any questions for me before we begin? No?
That's clear.
Thank you very much. I now invite you to address the committee.
I very much appreciate the musical introduction.
Throw it on the ground. Please proceed, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I'm not delighted to be in Ottawa today. There's an issue about snow and weather, of course, but it's an issue about the climate as well. I left this city in '96 following my resignation from the Public Service of Canada.
I resigned from the public service in circumstances eerily parallel to my brief but still shining moment with Karl-Heinz Schreiber, with one significant difference. When presented with the facts, Mr. Mulroney did not hesitate to do the right thing and declare barehead dead. In 1996, had my deputy ministerial colleague at Public Works stood up to the very same minister who was piling pressure on us at ACOA, he could have nipped in the bud what became the sponsorship scandal. Regrettably, efforts by your Public Accounts Committee to minimize these situations in future are being frustrated by the government, as Mr. Gomery reminded us on the second anniversary of his report, and of our not-so-new government. Canadians who have been following the Mulroney-Schreiber affair have been seeing how Canada really works. The story is one of lobbyists and lobbying, and the power of the Prime Minister and his office, and it's also a story about the media. I can't help wondering whether you'd have launched these hearings back in 2001 with Frank Moores still alive to testify, had the National Post not killed the story of Mr. Schreiber's cash payments, a story that flew in the face of everything we thought we knew when the government paid Mr. Mulroney $2.1 million to settle his defamation suit. Or maybe 3 years, not 3 months ago, had William Kaplan been interviewed on politics or on the House or on any of the other programs that routinely feature far less significant books than A Secret Trial. Can you imagine a newspaper in Canada killing a sensational scoop about a former Prime Minister that is today on everyone's lips? Frankly, it still boggles the mind. And I warn you, don't get me started on journalism in your questions. I spend most of my time these days reviewing the daily press on my website, and it's not always a favorable review. Today, I'm here to assist you in two specific areas. First, on the Bearhead project, the reason you summoned me to Ottawa to appear today. En 1995,
in 1995, I gave the RCMP, at its request, a sworn statement about what I knew on this project of Mr. Schreiber's.
In the 1980s. Some of them made a lot of money. One of them, Fred Doucette, had extraordinary access to the Prime Minister's office. After he left PMO, he would still bring visitors to the PM's office on the Hill, upstairs. These appointments were not on our schedule and were unknown to me unless I happened to chance upon them. This extraordinary access may explain in part why Bearhead refused to die even after Mr. Mulroney killed it. Comme j'ai écrit récemment dans Le Devoir,
as I wrote recently in Le Devoir, I can help you as well in identifying the sources of large sources of cash taken to 24 Sussex Drive.
Scratching their heads when they heard that you'd invited Mr. Mulroney's ex-chef to testify. But I guess it's understandable in light of the possibilities conjured up over the years by François Martin's vivid upstairs-downstairs gossip. The documents I've brought today, including two I've not written about before, identify a more prosaic source of this cash. As you will see from these documents, Mr. Mulroney and his family had an expensive lifestyle, and one can understand why he would have been somewhat preoccupied by what life after politics would bring. And perhaps this explains why he seemed eager to cater to the rich and powerful, as I describe in the Kaplan afterward, with anecdotes, one of which has never been reported. I urge you, however, to keep your eye on the ball and not to get distracted by the kind of stuff that fills Frank magazine. Around the end of Mr. Mulroney's second term, Canada was rated the 5th least corrupt country in the world by Transparency International. When Mr. Chrétien left office, we were 12th. At the end of the Paul Martin interregnum, we were 14th, which means that this town has a bipartisan problem. The better way to look at it, I think, is that it also has a bipartisan solution in that two parties are not centrally implicated in this problem, not having formed government. Since 2006, Canada has climbed back to 9th place. But as news out of Public Works last week suggested, we've a long way to go to ensure that the best country in the world is also the least corrupt country in the world. In contrast to the leadership shown by Paul Martin when sponsorships hit the fan, I have grave doubts that Mr. Harper wants Airbus answers. And I also doubt that the proposed public inquiry will uncover where $10 million in Schreibergeld ended up. The darker possibilities were captured by a Mulroney cabinet minister visiting the splendid new home of the head of Earnscliffe, then a Tory lobby firm, it may surprise some of you to know. Why is it so much more lucrative, he asked, to know Harvey Andre than to be Harvey Andre? You're here today, and I'm not out walking my dog, gazing at trees in first blossom, because the RCMP botched its Airbus investigation. And I hope that in drafting your final report, you'll examine the special prosecutor system designed by your former colleague, the Honourable Stephen Owen, in British Columbia. Meanwhile, this wretched process is Canadians' best hope for getting to the bottom of a story that was ignored by members of Parliament and suppressed to a remarkable extent by remarkably large sections of the media for a remarkably long time. As a semi-retired public servant, it would have been easy enough to say no and go on enjoying life in Victoria when Mr. Kaplan asked me to contribute an afterword to his book, A Secret Trial. You've come to the table late, but late is better than never, unless, that is, it's simply to dine out on partisan politics. Vous détenez tous les pouvoirs nécessaires.
You have all the power you need. And Mr. Maynard, Mr. Commandant have shown the way.
Truth, you'll not hesitate to subpoena tax and bank records or to invite Mr. Mulroney back to testify. And you'll start pressing the government to offer Mr. Schreiber a deal to spill the beans, if he has any to spill, that is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We'll move now to questioning. Mr. Thibault, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur Spector. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Spector. I know you've come a long way to inform the people of Canada through this committee of the House. You said in your article in Le Devoir, just a moment, I can't hear, so I just need to plug in my earpiece here, if I might.
Ça va?
Allez-y.
Okay, you can hear me now? There's a missing piece, the earpiece. You said in your article, your column in Le Devoir, as in your column in the Globe, that you could inform the committee about the sources of funds that went through 24 Sussex Drive and where they came from. Could we invite you to do that now, please? Yes. The exact wording, just to make it clear, I said that I would be able to help you identify the sources of the cash taken to 24 Sussex. I have 3 documents, one package of documents and one specific document, and I'm going to explain to you what I have, and I will give it give these documents to your clerks. The interpreter point out that we do not have them in the booth for the moment.
That Mr. Mulrooney was being reimbursed around $5,000 a month by the PC Canada Fund for, quote, expenses incurred as party leader, unquote. Sometimes we would give this money to Mrs. Mulrooney in cash. Sometimes we would send a check to Alain Paris, le comptable de Monsieur Mulrooney.
Mr. Mulrooney's accountant in Montreal.
Have you ever been informed of that?
No, I was never on the party side.
Please go on. Please go on.
I wrote about all this in the Kaplan afterward, and which explains why the text that I wrote in Le Devoir did not become a front-page story in Le Devoir and did not become a story in the Globe and Mail, both of which had the text. And the reason that it did not become a front-page story in Le Devoir and La Presse, where it did in the Globe, whereas it did in La Presse, is that the reporters for Le Devoir and the reporters for the Globe and Mail had read the afterword. And so they knew that I had already written about this. So the first set of documents I have is on the reimbursement for personal expenses. And the one additional piece of information that may help, shortly before I left the Prime Minister's office, I was told of a CCRA ruling defining these reimbursements as non-taxable, i.e. they did not constitute income. So this is the first set of documents. In addition to that, and I only learned this recently, it appears that Mr. Mulrooney was being reimbursed for quote-unquote personal expenses by the PC Canada Fund. I have no knowledge of any aspect of this arrangement. Any aspect. But the document appears to indicate, from the document, from the face of the document, it appears to indicate that he was reimbursed slightly more than $100,000 for the 9-month period between October 1986 and June 1987.
In cash, again?
It does not specify that. So I should say I have. There's absolutely no indication that it was cash, check, or however.
Yes.
So on an annual basis, this would amount to $135,000 a year. That's the second document that I've brought. The third document that I've brought is a summary of the inventory, the PC Canada Fund, or the PC Party inventory at 24 Sussex and at Harrington Lake. And it shows that by around the time of the end of the first term in office, the party or the fund, I'm not sure, it may be the same thing, had spent $136,000 on furnishings at 24 Sussex Drive and $53,000 on furnishings at Harrington Lake. And so I will table that document as well. And those are the documents I have, and that is what I was referring to. The latter two documents are new. I did not know about them. But as I wrote in the afterword, there was this arrangement.
Were you, at the time that you were Chief of Staff, were you aware of any other money leaving Prime Minister's office going to 24 Sussex, such as the allegations about Chef Martin?
Absolutely not.
Such as those suggestions?
Absolutely not.
You personally transferred some of these funds into bank accounts?
The checks were written to the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister. This is an arrangement that went back to the first Chief of Staff and continued with subsequent Chiefs of Staff. As far as I know, it continued after I left, but I don't know that for a fact. But the arrangement was in place for the first, second, third, and I was the fourth Chief of Staff. So I know that arrangement. The check was written to me in trust, or to my predecessors in trust. It was deposited, cashed, whatever, and transferred to either the accountant or to Mrs. Mulrooney.
When you say in the afterword in Kaplan book, you say that your staff would pore over receipts and documents and expense accounts to see what was part of the expenses of office. Was that for repayment by the party or for repayment by the Prime Minister's office's budget?
No, this was in relation to this first set of documents. This was the reimbursement for expenses incurred as party leader. So the way the system worked is we had a staff member. In my time, actually, it was a gentleman who was seconded from the External Affairs Department. So I had an official, a public servant, poring over this to look at the expenses that were or could legitimately be considered to be expenses that Mr. Mulroney was incurring as party leader. And they would, and those expenses had been submitted by Mrs. Mulroney, and he would approve some and not approve others. And when we had done the final reconciliation, we then claimed funds from the PC Canada Fund.
Thank you.
Madame Lavallee, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Merci de venir, monsieur.
Thanks very much. Thanks for being here, Mr. Spector. So if I understand correctly, you would agree with François Martin, who said that at 24 Sussex Drive, cash came in as though it came from heaven. There was a culture of cash. Why were the checks made out to you? Why weren't the checks made out to Mr. Mulroney or to Mrs. Mulroney? It's a very good question, and I can't answer it. Perhaps I've raised some issues today that need answering. At that time, there are 2 points I would mention. First, my first meeting with Prime Minister Mulroney when he offered me the position, he explained the system to me. He explained that all my predecessors had performed that duty and that would be one of my duties as Chief of Staff. The second point, it seemed quite reasonable because I was familiar with arrangements of that type. First of all, by reading the newspapers, I knew that Mr. Davis, when he was the Premier of Ontario, had an arrangement of this type. And before I came to Ottawa, I was the Deputy Minister to the Premier of BC, and he had a supplement from his political party. So it didn't seem all that strange to me. Was Mr. Bennett paid directly with a check? No, I don't know. I wasn't involved in the process as such that existed in BC at that time. I was a Deputy Minister. He had a Principal Secretary in his office who performed political duties. Excuse me for interrupting, but I don't have much time. When you got your checks, did you have to provide invoices, receipts, or something? Well, as I said to Mr. Thibault, the invoices were submitted by Ms. Mulroney, and it was someone from my time who looked at the bills, the invoices, to determine the expenses that would qualify as expenses of the party and not personal expenses. Were the expenses mainly personal expenses for Mr. and Mrs. Mulroney, or did you see any others? I don't know that. I trusted that individual, that member of my team who is a public servant, someone from Foreign Affairs, so I trusted that individual that he would perform that duty properly. So you didn't wonder then why didn't give the money directly to Mr. Mulroney? No, I didn't. An intelligent man like yourself, you didn't wonder about it? Even an intelligent person like myself didn't wonder about it. That's quite surprising. Yes, it is. But it was to add to the salary of Mr. Mulroney, who was earning some $400,000. I wasn't present. I wasn't present at the meeting where the party and Mr. Mulroney reached an agreement about this arrangement. So I don't know when, how, or any of the other details. All I know is that this arrangement existed. On the 14th of November of this year, you said you're quoted as saying that the Mulroney-Schreiber affair could be one of the worst scandals in Canadian history. You acknowledge that quote. You really think that the behavior of the Conservatives at the time, in between 90 and 92, was worse than the sponsorship scandal? Well, I don't know. That is why I'm asking you to pursue this matter, to look into it. I think there's at least $10 million, and we don't know what happened to it, to what hands it went. So it's possible. But where do you think the $10 million went? I don't know. Frankly, I'm not ruling out the possibility that Mr. Schreiber kept them, kept the $10 million from. I just don't know, but I would like to know. I will turn the floor over to my colleague, and I think that Canadians would like to know this as well. What happened to the $10 million? I will turn the floor over to my colleague, Mr. Mena. Thanks, Mr. Spector, for being here. I accept your assessment, but I would say that I am in total disagreement with you. This type of committee does not allow us to get to the bottom of things unless we take a huge amount of time that is probably longer than the government will last. We've got just a few minutes to ask questions of each witness, so it's nothing like a commission of inquiry. I'm more impressed by your skills as shown during Mr. Mulroney's appearance. I was really struck. I've got no time for compliments. Later, please. Let's get to the heart of the matter here right away. You've given us a few figures. $5,000, so $60,000 a year in 9 months. You saw $100,000. So am I to understand that all this money that was coming in to pay for the expenses of the Mulroneys came from the same source, namely from the PC Canada Fund? Yes. You started your introduction by talking about the culture of lobbyists that existed. So if I understand correctly, someone who wanted to influence the government one way or another couldn't give money directly to the Prime Minister, wouldn't have accepted, but it could have given it to the PC Fund. And assuming that someone in the PC Fund would speak to the Prime Minister, it's possible. So that's what you're speaking out against. Essentially, no. I'm speaking out against the system that existed in Ottawa that is still in place, in my opinion, that in order to do business with, well, Mr. Schreiber said it during his testimony, in order to do business with the government. He was an international business person, and he said that in order to do business with the Government of Canada, you have to hire a lobbyist. I don't have any more time, but there is a comment in Quebec. Everyone thinks that it would have never happened to René Lévesque. Well, I remember some stories with Oxygen at one time, if I recall. It is a bipartisan problem here in Ottawa. I said that. Let me finish. Because there are two parties. But there's also the New Democrats and the Bloc who've never been in government. But that's not the case in Quebec. So there are some stories.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Spector, for being here and taking part in this wretched process. As wretched as it might be, it is all we have currently, and we don't know how narrow the scope of the full public inquiry might be. I agree. Let me get right to an issue that concerns us, Mr. Spector. Mr. Mulroney has said over and over again that he had absolutely nothing to do with the choice of Air Canada to purchase the Airbus product. Yet he fired 13 of the 15 members of the board of directors of Air Canada during 1985. I believe you would have been the chief of staff in that period.
No, I was not even in Ottawa during those years. I arrived in Ottawa in 1986. So in fact, when the RCMP came to ACOA looking for the copy of the agreement in our files, because ACOA was the lead agency, It was only by accident that I was there. And they didn't come to me, they didn't come looking for me for a statement about Bearhead. So I started talking to the sergeant, and he said, it came out that I was in the PMO. And he said, well, do you know anything about Airbus? I said, no, that was before my time, but I know about Bearhead. So, sorry.
Fair enough. Okay. I will move on then perhaps to the influence of corporate lobbyists. It's a great concern for us as well. The frequency and the regularity of visits into the PMO. You said some of these meetings weren't scheduled. People like Frank Moores were coming and going.
Frank Moores, I had no, I'm not even sure, I had no, I was speaking about Mr. Doucette.
And did you see Mr. Schreiber?
I met with Mr. Schreiber.
On a regular basis?
I met once with him after I was handed the Bearhead file. I met with him to get his side of the story. And it was that process that eventually led to my telling Mr. Mulroney that...
what year would that...
That would be 1990.
1990, I see. Mr. Mulroney gave a sworn affidavit, or swore in an affidavit that in 1996 that he had only passing acquaintances, very little dealings with Mr. Schreiber. Would you be able to say anything about the veracity of that statement? During those years, I had no knowledge of his dealings with Mr. Schreiber. He did hand me the Bearhead file, Mr. Mulroney did, but with what we've learned subsequent to 1996, it certainly looks like Mr. Mulroney had more than passing dealings with Mr. Schreiber. Thank you. I can ask Mr. Mulcair to take the microphone.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Si je peux intervenir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to comment now. I would like to go back to a statement made by Mr. Spector when he said in English that the RCMP botched the investigation into the Airbus matter. Are there some things contained in Mr. Johnson's report? There are two fairly surprising things in there. The first thing he says, talks about well-tilled ground, and to show that we don't need to investigate Airbus. He quotes the two books by Stevie Cameron. Rather surprising to use that as evidence to show that we don't need to investigate Airbus. But another thing that has a direct connection with RCMP, it concerns me a little because since the beginning, there's been some vagueness in the RCMP statements. Page 20 in the French version, Mr. Johnson says, contrary to the recent statements by Mr. Schreiber before the Ethics Committee, the RCMP states that Mr. Schreiber and his lawyer were questioned on a number of occasions during the investigations between August and 99 and September 2004. He gives other dates up in 2006. Unless I'm mistaken, all of that was after the settlement in Airbus. To your knowledge, from your conversations dating back to 95, did they say, we spoke to Schreiber? I'm going to respond to the first part of your question mainly.
I think Mr. Johnston's statement that the RCMP, had conducted the investigation and this is is absolutely incorrect. And I'd go one step further. This may not be common knowledge, but I have this from Bill Kaplan, who wrote the book, A Secret Trial. And you can buy it at your bookstore. Très difficile.
Very hard to find. And it was difficult going from the beginning, difficult. And it is a book that was almost nipped in the bud by the McGill Queen's Press. But we would like to have the answer to my question if we could. Sorry, apologize. Fine. You were speaking about the investigation.
About the cash when it shut down the investigation in 2003.
You're saying that it did?
They did not know about the cash when they said that the investigation is over. Mr. Kaplan, I can assure you, and I'm sure you'll have him, has impeccable sources. They did not know. They had had a rumor about it, which makes it even more extraordinary that they shut down the investigation. I mean, they don't shut down murder investigations in this country. They allow investigations to go cold, but to shut down an investigation is an extraordinary act by the RCMP, particularly when they had heard rumors of the cash payment, but they had not confirmed the cash payment. Shut it down. Secondly, on the question of whether they did or did not, I have no knowledge of that. I think you'll have to ask the RCMP themselves. But I suspect what's happening here is that people are playing games with the word Airbus. A lot of people have played games with the word Airbus. Airbus is one contract, but it's also a contract. It's also an affair that incorporates 3 separate proposals. So people, I think, play with that term to give slightly evasive answers. And I would think that that is an example, the example that you've cited in French is an example of that evasiveness.
Moi, je peux vous dire que c'est moi qui ai posé les questions. Puis quand
I'm the one who asked the questions. When I asked the question to Mr. Schreiber, it was very clear that I wanted to know whether the RCMP had spoken to him before paying the 2.1 in a settlement to Mr. Mulroney. And that's not what comes out in Mr. Johnson's report. I had the impression that when the RCMP interviewed me in '95 that they were at the very beginning of their investigation. That was my assessment, but it was just an impression. I wasn't based on fact. Thanks very much, Mr. Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, it's a matter of public record that the RCMP spent 8 years and likely millions of dollars investigating allegations regarding the Airbus purchase by Air Canada and the Bearhead project. The plain fact is that the RCMP announced on April 22, 2003, and I quote, "After an exhaustive investigation in Canada and abroad, the RCMP has concluded its investigation into allegations of wrongdoing involving MBB helicopters, Thyssen, and Airbus. The RCMP has now concluded that the remaining allegations cannot be substantiated and that no charges will be laid." I guess, Mr. Spector, the first questions I have relate to the relevance of your testimony to this committee. First of all, do you have any evidence for this committee of any wrongdoing by any public official with respect to Airbus?
I said I was not in Ottawa when the Airbus contract was let.
So you have no evidence of any wrongdoing by anyone related to Airbus?
Well, you know, Mr. Hebert, with respect, your committee invited me here today. Your committee knew that I was not in Ottawa in 1985. So I don't know why you're interrogating me this way. You summoned me to Ottawa. You clearly thought that the things I've written in the Globe and Mail and the things that I've written in the afterword of the Kaplan book, assuming you've read them, this committee obviously felt that I did have information that was relevant. So I'm not sure why you're saying this to me. And as for your citation of the RCMP's statement, look, I don't believe them. And I don't think Canadians believe them. And I think Canadians now are very skeptical about the RCMP. I think they're skeptical about the RCMP for a whole bunch of reasons. For events that have taken place in British Columbia recently, for a certain announcement that took place during the last election campaign. I think the Canadian people are very skeptical about the RCMP, and I don't believe them. I think you should get the RCMP here under oath, and I will give you the name of the inspector that you should ask as to whether they knew that they had established the fact of these cash payments when they shut down the investigation. I think the RCMP is part of this problem. I think you need, look, let me be very, you're from British Columbia. You know, in British Columbia, we have had 2 premiers investigated by a special prosecutor, one from each party, criminal charges laid. Both were acquitted. That's part of our system. Our justice system doesn't demand convictions. It demands equal justice. We've had a 3rd premier investigated, and the special prosecutor recommended against the laying of charges. And British Columbians said, that's fine too. In Ottawa, the scorecard is 0. At whatever level of the Executive Council. And I've worked as a deputy minister in both jurisdictions. I worked as a deputy minister in Victoria, and I worked as a deputy minister in Ottawa. And I can tell you Politicians in Victoria are no more corrupt than politicians in Ottawa. You need a transparent process. Stephen Owen, his recommendation, what he did as Ombudsman of British Columbia, the insight was the following: to ensure equal justice, which is what our system is based on. Sometimes you have to put in place special arrangements for high-profile and particularly political cases. So what happens in British Columbia is, when there's an allegation made against a politician, the Assistant Deputy Attorney General, a career public servant, names an outside counsel developed from a list developed by the Bar Association and the department. And that person investigates and determines whether charges should be laid. That is a clean system. That's the system that our British cousins are looking at now. That's the system that Mr. Harper spoke of in the last campaign when he talked about a director of public prosecutions. It's not quite what we got, but that's the system that we need in Ottawa if we're to stop the slide that this country has seen in Transparency International ratings.
Thank you, Mr. Spector. I do appreciate the fact that our numbers have improved in recent years, and I appreciate your passion with respect to this issue. I do want to give you an opportunity, however, to provide any evidence that you might have about wrongdoing to this committee, and I'm very sincere in my question. So if you have any evidence about wrongdoing by any public official relating to the consulting agreement between Mr. Mulrooney and Mr. Schreiber, or with respect to the correspondence, or with respect to Airbus, these are all elements of the mandate that we've established for ourselves, and I'm trying to keep ourselves to the relevance of this matter. So do you have any evidence of wrongdoing on those issues before I proceed?
I have no evidence one way or another.
All right. When it comes to the Cape Breton Bearhead project, when was it finally rejected by the government?
I don't know that it ever was.
Okay. I thought you mentioned that Mr. Mulrooney killed the project.
He killed it, but it seemed to come back. I mean, it was like the phoenix. You know, I'll give you two anecdotes. One from Harry Swain, a deputy minister who might be known to some of the official opposition members who sat in government. His first briefing of his minister, John Manley, in 1993. Mr. Manley asked him, "Do you have any advice for a new minister?" And he said, two pieces of advice. First, you should read Yes, Minister. Secondly, don't ever meet with Karl-Heinz Schreiber. Those were his two pieces of advice. Second anecdote is a statement made by Glenn Shortliff, who is a former clerk of the Privy Council, talking about the Bearhead project. It was like this whack-a-mole that would never stay down. It kept coming back. To me, it was like the phoenix. It kept rising from the ashes. And I want to know whether there's more than smoke there.
All right,
it just wouldn't die.
Mr. Hebert.
All right, my time is limited. You mentioned that you met with the RCMP. Can you tell us what you told them at the time about what you knew about the Bearhead project and the Airbus situation?
To save you time, it's all in the statement that I gave them, which should be available to your committee. It was a sworn statement. It was signed. The statement was referred to in the letter that went to the Swiss government. So it's all there, and I wouldn't change a word that I said, particularly because it's 13 years later, and I'm sure my memory was better back then than it is.
And do you have any new information?
On the Bearhead project itself?
Yes.
Well, I have new information that I had learned subsequently. For example, that it didn't die. I mean, when I left Ottawa when I left the Prime Minister's office, I thought it was dead. And I was very surprised when I came back from the Middle East to not only find out that it wasn't dead, but to find out that Mark Lalonde had been involved in some way in it. I was astonished.
Just last question. Do you have any evidence of any wrongdoing related to the Bearhead project?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spector, with regard to the RCM, the identity of the RCMP investigator that you referred to, is that Inspector Al Matthews?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The RCMP inspector that you referred to that had knowledge of the three payments, was that Inspector Al Matthews?
Yes.
Thank you. With regard to the report, the expense report that you went through very briefly, the $101,000
Yes.
between October '86 and June of '97, which annualized was somewhere around 135. Can you just confirm to the committee, these reimbursement of these, which are called personal expenses, and they include salary of a person for their own use, Palm Beach trips, Rome, satellite services, theater tickets, flowers, restaurants. These are all personal expenses, not to do with being Prime Minister?
I can only confirm what's on that document because I had no knowledge of this. It says personal, as you can see for yourself. So you know as much about this document as I do.
Okay. And you stated that the monies, it was determined by the Canada Revenue Agency that they are not taxed?
On the first arrangement.
On the first arrangement.
I know nothing about this arrangement, including anything related to taxation.
Thank you. Mr. Dhaliwal, second round. You have 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Inspector, to this committee here. As PC Party Treasurer in the early 90s, was Mr. Jim Prentice aware of those payments to Maroney, that payments that you talked about?
I never knew Jim Prentice. Still don't know him. I've never met the man, either then or now. And my understanding from reading correspondence and from what I knew of those times is that the current Senator Angus was a key player in these arrangements. I had never heard the name Jim Prentice.
You mentioned that while Doucette was a lobbyist, he would bring people to Mr. Maroney's Hill office, and these appointments were not booked through your office. Could you explain how these meetings took place?
Well, I mean, most of you, if not all of you, know the little arrangement upstairs in terms of the Prime Minister's corner office, opposite the Cabinet room. On one side of him, you'll find the Secretary. I think it would probably be the same. And on the other side, there's a little office where I, as Chief of Staff, used to work. I had my main office at Langevin. I would work in that office, and particularly if I was going up to the Hill to see the Prime Minister after question period, I would be up there and working in the office. And I would see Mr. Doucette waiting outside for the end of question period, and he would then bring in someone who wasn't on our schedule. And they didn't look like Girl Guides going in to get their photos taken with the Prime Minister. Like they were wearing suits.
Thank you. Mr. Spector, do you have a copy, and are you willing to table the sworn statement you gave it to the RCMP in 1995 about the Weirhead project?
To the RCMP in 95? Yes, I have a copy with me, but I'm sure you have a copy, but if you don't, I'd be pleased to give you a copy of it.
Could you please table that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And was it Lowell Murray who first informed you that the Hugh Segal took on the Weirhead project and it was kept alive after you left PMO's office? Can you tell us how this came up?
Yeah, you know, I was out of the country, and when I came back, I think it was in the Globe and Mail, probably in the Globe and Mail, because it is the most comprehensive coverage in the country. I saw this article saying that Mr. Lalonde and Mr. McKay had posted bond for Mr. Schreiber. So it must have been around 97 or 98. And I emailed Lowell Murray, with whom I had worked very closely with Lowell Murray. He was the Minister of State for Federal-Provincial Relations during the period that we did Meech Lake. So I had worked with Lowell Murray. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And I emailed him and said, what gives? Like, you know, I thought that project was dead. And he said, oh, no. And I'm almost sort of imitating Lowell Murray. Those of you who know him can hear him. Oh, no. It kept coming back. And he said, even Huey had dealt with it. So my understanding is that, and when I say Huey had dealt with it, I'm not suggesting any impropriety on Mr. Siegel's part. My understanding is it did come back, and Mr. Siegel gave it the back of his hand, too. And that was when Mr. Corbet, but that was before Karl-Heinz Schreiber went to do his courtesy call at Harrington Lake at the end of the Mulroney period. So it wasn't even dead after Mr. Siegel disposed of it.
you have noted that Shriver has considered suing the government for not following through on the 1988 understanding in principle. When did Mr. Shriver first raise this to you and first learn about this?
He never raised that with me. He was not quite that aggressive. When I dealt with him, and what offended me most about dealing with him was that he was basically engaged in a process of character assassination of public servants. He was alleging that his difficulties with this project were as a result of certain officials being in the pockets of General Motors, who were the supplier of LAVs to the Canadian military. And, I mean, these people he was talking about were my colleagues. I mean, I came out of that community, and I knew them, and I knew they weren't in anybody's pockets.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hebert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, Mr. Spector, you've told us about the system of cash being used at 24 Sussex. I'm wondering if you could explain to us what relevance you think that has to our study.
I would ask you to ask yourselves that. I mean, you're the ones who've invited a chef, an ex-chef, to appear at these hearings. You're the ones who seem to be intrigued by that story. And I'm coming here to tell, and I was invited principally to talk about the Bearhead arrangement, but I think as a citizen of Canada, I have a responsibility to provide information that I think can help you. And I'm telling you, don't get diverted by these wild goose chases.
Like the goose chases that you're
we're looking for $10 million. We're not looking for the reconciliation of something that appeared in Stevie Cameron's book about what the chef may or may not have seen at 24 Sussex. I mean, it's a vivid description, and it would make a good television show. But I'm saying you're chasing, you know, from what I know, that's not what you should be doing. What you should be doing is subpoenaing documents, subpoenaing bank records, getting a deal, proposing a deal. The criminal justice system makes these kinds of deals on a daily basis. Let's find out what Shriver has. He may have nothing. He may be tearing out the guts of this country for no reason. On the other hand, he may have something. Let's find out. What are we delaying for? Make him a deal. So he'd end up staying in Canada. So he'd end up not going to Germany if he actually has something and if the testimony proves reliable. There's a public interest in getting to the bottom of this story. We are not going to clean up our system of government until we get to the bottom of this story.
And I think, Mr. Spector, that the best way to do that is through a public inquiry. But I have to ask you, if you don't think the cash transactions that you're referring to are relevant to what the committee is addressing, then why did you bring them up? Are you telling us that you thought this system of repayment was unethical or somehow illegal?
I wrote about this in the afterword, and you invited me to appear here. I wrote about this
actually,
in
Mr. Spector, we didn't invite you. It was the members of the opposition
well, the committee,
that invited
you are one committee, and
we have no say over here.
And let me just say, I mean, I find, well, okay, if we're talking about the conservative side of this committee now.
I'm asking you, Mr. Spector,
Mr. Chairman,
did you have any ethical or moral concerns about the cash payments? I'm asking you, Mr. Spector, did you have any ethical or moral or legal concerns about this system of cash payments?
Okay, now it's Mr. Spector's turn.
I would like to, I find quite interesting your statement that the public inquiry is the way to go, and particularly your Prime Minister, in his Christmas interview, suggested that maybe we don't need one. And then when we got a report suggesting very narrow terms of reference for that public inquiry. So no, I think that your committee has all the powers, quite frankly, and I accept Monsieur Ménard's disclaimer. I think the 10-minute rule is a problem, but I think there's a ways around that. I think Bill Kaplan has suggested a way where you could focus your questioning.
Can I take from your avoidance of answering the question that I asked that you don't want to talk about the cash transactions that you introduced to this committee?
Obviously, I have no problems with the ethics of the cash transactions. I wrote about them in the afterward, and I've been very forthcoming about them, and I have no problem. I think that particularly because I was told that they had passed muster with CCRA. So I don't have any ethics. And I'm not sure what you're suggesting by even asking that question. I wrote about that, and that material has been on the public record for 3 years. I haven't hid that.
Can I ask you one last question? Where did you get these documents?
I got them from a file in the Prime Minister's office, which I asked to have made before I left the office. And I thought what I was asking for was the documents that related to my involvement in this, but apparently there was more in the file. And the first time I looked at this file was 2 weeks ago when I was preparing for this committee. So it was a big surprise.
Very much. Madame Lavalette, s'il vous plaît.
Je vais séparer mon temps avec Maître Ménard.
I will be splitting my time with Mr. Minau. Would you say, Mr. Spector, that the handling of cash was a common practice at 24 Sussex?
Tout ce que je sais, pardon, excusez-moi.
Sorry. All I know is what I read in the newspapers, the daily newspapers. But it wasn't an organized system, or was it an organized system? I have no information on that question. With respect to GCI and Fred Doucette, who was a lobbyist, who had his own company that with his brother and so on, with the other people in GCI. Did you see any others with such good access to Mr. Mulroney, or was Mr. Doucette the chief lobbyist? Well, in my time, it was him. No other individual had the same access to the Prime Minister's office. Did you recognize the people who he brought in and who didn't look like scouts? No? No. Do you think that the $300,000 that Mr. Mulroney got from Mr. Shroni, or the $225,000, whatever the amount is, that he got after '93, do you think that there's a connection to Airbus? I do not know that. I don't know. A very specific question. What account did the checks come from? From the PC Canada Fund, but Stevie Cameron says that there was a secret fund set up by Guy Charbonneau, a former senator, to meet the needs of Brian Mulroney. She even has the account number and the name of the financial institution involved. It would be Montreal Trust with the number 830. You will see documents and records on this. I don't think there's a connection to Ms. Cameron's version, but you'll see that for yourself. Mr. Spector, you wrote in the devoir that you would help the committee to understand the motivations and the behavior of your former boss by referring to other files. Do you want to refer to some other matters, some other files? I was always under the impression that Mr. Mulroney had one eye on his life after politics, and that he was courting people with power and people with money. And what do you mean when you say courting? Let me give you two examples. You mean they were favoring them? Giving them special treatment, let's say. Let me give you two examples. The first is related to the decision by the National Post to kill the story. Mr. Mulroney named Conrad Black to the Privy Council. Someone from outside was appointed named to the Privy Council. And the Asper family was very grateful for his intervening in the Milgard case. So it was extraordinary that the Prime Minister of Canada would intervene in a matter like the David Milgard matter. No, but that's not going to convince us that he got a lot of money. But I understand that. Well, let me give you another example. But you accepted at the outset, Mr. Spector, that you would carry some money that would cover the personal expenses. So, expenses of the party. So you saw no moral objection to that. But you don't think that took a certain dimension, and the amount of the money and the nature of certain expenses, at some point you felt that if there wasn't something immoral, there was something illegal, at least something immoral, if not illegal, and that needed to be changed. Well, in my day in the PMO, there was a system where there was a payment of about $5,000 a month to the Prime Minister. That's all that was in place in my day in the PMO, or at least to my knowledge, in the Prime Minister's office. That's not a huge amount of money.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to summarize to this point, Mr. Spector, we've concluded that you have no new evidence with respect to wrongdoing, that you didn't think there was anything unethical or illegal about the payment system that was in place for the former Prime Minister, but you have expressed a great deal of passion about ways that we can prevent this sort of thing from happening in the future. Are you aware of our Accountability Act and the fact that we've brought in measures to strengthen the lobbyist registration procedures, to increase the power of the Auditor General to follow public money, to provide whistleblower protection for people who rat out wrongful behavior? Are you aware of that? And what other suggestions would you have for this committee in terms of preventing this sort of unethical or perhaps questionable, because nobody's said it's unethical or illegal at this point, questionable activities from happening in the future?
Well, first, to the preamble of your question. First of all, I have presented new evidence here.
Of what?
I've presented new evidence of reimbursement systems that I was not aware of when I wrote the afterword to the Kaplan book, and when I've written in the Le Devoir and the Globe. That's new evidence. This is something that has not been heard before. And I've said in response to your chairman that I have no information about it, and I have I'm not in a position to tell you, to cast judgment one way or another on it as to whether it was appropriate or not. So before you put words into my mouth, that is my evidence.
But I heard you say a moment ago that you didn't think it was
in terms of the second part of your question, I am aware of the reforms, and I think they've gone some distance. But I also know that the Prime Minister said that he would make deputy ministers accountable to committees of Parliament, and he has not done so. And there's a fight going on between the Public Accounts Committee and the Privy Council Office, which I assume has the backing of the Prime Minister, over the protocol to apply. I'm also aware that the lobbyist registration rules are not quite what the Prime Minister promised. Now, you're asking me what I think would help. I think one thing that would help would be to keep lobbyists out of playing any political role in Ottawa. Participating in political, we've already looked at the question of campaign funding. I think they should be kept out completely of any political role, including any role on the media. I think anybody who's registered as a lobbyist that there should be no ability for those people to say that they have any special access or any influence with the party in power, that the party in power has any debt to them, that they should not be able to say, you know, the Conservatives are in power, and you know which lobby firm you should engage when the Conservatives are in power. I think there's a legitimate role for the industry, but that role should be based on expertise in knowing the way governments operate, having a large Rolodex of officials, but it should not be based on so-and-so, look, that so-and-so was in the war room, or so-and-so ran the buses for the campaign. I think that would help in addition to cleaning up the system.
Well, Mr. Schreiber, I appreciate your...
It's Spector.
Mr. Spector, I appreciate your addition to this discussion. I'm still at a bit of a loss in terms of your testimony, because on one hand you're saying that you said a moment ago that there was nothing unethical or illegal about the payment system. I offered you an opportunity to provide additional evidence about Bearhead, about Airbus, about the consulting agreements with Mr. Schreiber and Mr. Mulroney, and I've heard no new evidence. So I'm at a bit of a loss as to why you're saying now that there is new evidence. If you're referring to this payment system, that you had documents for I don't know how many years, I I don't see how it's relevant to what the committee's trying to.
Well, maybe when you read
address.
the transcript, you'll see the relevance, and maybe you should read the transcripts before François Martin comes to testify.
Okay. Mr. Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Très brièvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, I know there's not much time. Could you give us the name of the investigator, the inspector?
Répondu à votre président, c'était Monsieur Martin.
I answered the chair, Mr. Matthews. You said earlier that you had another example to give. What was the other example? I wrote about this matter in the afterword to the Kaplan book. Something that's been published. Okay, that's fine. It wasn't reported ever. But it is published. It's in there. It involves Winnipeg as well. Is there anything unpublished? Anything that you haven't said today? No. Last question, since we're out of time. You said you referred to the mandate given to the Commission of Inquiry, the terms of reference. You said quite rightly that what was promised by the Prime Minister was a full public inquiry. After his musings over Christmas, he said it might not be necessary. Mr. Johnson says it's well-tilled ground, and he quotes from Stevie Cameron to back that up. With what you said earlier about the need to follow the money, particularly the $10 million, the mandate that Mr. Johnson is suggesting, do you think it's broad enough to follow the money, or do you think that this committee should, for example, request that certain papers and documents be produced, such as tax files and so on, bank records? Or do you think the mandate is broad enough? I'm quite convinced that your committee has all the powers it needs to follow up on these matters, and that it should do so. And what about Mr. Johnson's mandate? It's not broad enough. No, I don't think so. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Spector, and you bring us a very broad story as a career public servant who was involved. You must have felt very uncomfortable when you worked in the Prime Minister's office. You saw money being transferred, you saw people coming and going, cash being handled. Apparently, when you left, you kept records, because the checks, a lot of them apparently were made out in your name, as if you were working as a wage in terms of those checks. We also find that later on, when you went back to, must have gone back to British Columbia, when the two parties were being put together, the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party, you had a brief conversation with the present Prime Minister. And with that, Mr. Harper, apparently you and discussed the situation, must have been in terms of the two parties getting together. And the conversation, according to your writings, went around something about the relationship which Mr. Harper might have with Mr. Mulroney. And in that conversation, apparently, which you reported in the press, you gave Mr. Harper some recommendations in terms of how his relationship with Mr. Mulroney should be. Now, as you know, that recommendation that you suggested certainly wasn't followed, because even as late as 2006, Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Harper were having a very close relationship. In fact, the present Prime Minister was very happy to show Mr. Mulroney as one of the great architects of his election victory in 2006. So when you bring evidence to our committee today, talking about your work in the former Prime Minister's office, Mr. Mulroney's, the advice you offered, and the situation as it was, may I ask, in terms of the people that you saw coming and going in dark suits and black ties, who apparently had no given purpose in going to see Mr. Mulroney, could you give our committee the names of any of those people?
No, Mr. Hubbard, as I've answered Madame Lavallée, I believe, I did not recognize any of those people. But I must clarify some of the things you've said, because I did meet with Mr. Harper in 2003, a couple of days after the article appeared in the Globe and Mail, the first article on the cash payments. And Mr. Harper had a pained look on his face. And he said, "What should I say?" I mean, this wasn't the reason for our meeting. He said, what should I say if I'm asked about this? And I didn't give him any advice. At that point, I was writing for the Globe and Mail, and I'd like to finish because I think you put some words in my mouth that I would not like to have stand on the record. And I didn't give any advice because I thought that it was inappropriate for someone in my position to be giving political advice. I would have advised him to be very careful, and I think he made a mistake in not being very careful. However, I think it's a mistake that a lot of people in this country made. I think you only have to think back to September, to a 2-hour presentation by CTV, by their chief anchor on Mr. Mulroney, which was a full-blown public relations exercise, which at the very last minute had a puffball question thrown at Mr. Mulroney about the cash. Now, if the entire CTV news team in Ottawa, all these well-paid, qualified journalists from CTV, didn't smell something that would have said, hey, proceed with caution. If the chief anchor, the most experienced journalist in Canada, Lloyd Robertson, didn't smell something that said, whoa, tabarnak, there's something here that we should be very careful about, why would Stephen Harper, poor Stephen Harper, have said, let's be careful about this? So I think that probably answers your question.
Okay. Mr. Spector, we're going to wind this down now, and I have a couple of questions for you myself. You started off, and I think maybe I can characterize some of the testimony. You have provided us what you believe to be some puzzle pieces and challenged us to try to put this puzzle together.
Very good summation.
You talked about $10 million, and where did it go? Are you suggesting, or do you have any evidence, that this $10 million that you're talking about is money from either Thiessen, AG, or from Mr. Schreiber or any of his companies?
The $10 million that I'm referring to is what came out from the German justice system related to Karl-Heinz Schreiber. The best information we have is that Mr. Schreiber had $10 million to distribute in Canada. And either he kept it, or kept part of it, or he distributed it. And I think we should find out which it is.
Okay. Now, are you suggesting, or do you have any evidence whatsoever, that any monies from either Thiessen AG, from Karl-Heinz Schreiber, or any of his companies got into the PC Canada Fund with the specific directive that they be earmarked for Mr. Mulroney?
I have absolutely no evidence on that point.
Okay. On Bearhead, you're familiar, very familiar with the Bearhead project. First of all, in Nova Scotia, you knew it was cancelled by Mr. Mulroney in 1990. There was subsequent discussions about relocating that possible project in Montreal area. Mr. Benoit Bouchard, I believe, was involved at the time. Mr. Elmer McKay was involved at the time.
Mr. Corbet.
How can you explain to Canadians that after the Prime Minister and the Cabinet kill any prospect of a project because it was going to cost anywhere from $100 million to quite a bit more than that, some speculate. How can you explain that this was somehow still alive? Is this something that Mr. Mulroney knew about and wanted to sustain, continuing to have the impression that it was still alive when in fact it was not?
Well, that is the smoke in this whole thing. Look, Peter Lougheed, a Conservative, had instructed his cabinet never to meet with Karl-Heinz Schreiber. John Crosbie would never meet with Karl-Heinz Schreiber. I've told you what Harry Swain said about Karl. And yet Karl-Heinz Schreiber had this access to the Prime Minister's office to the point that I met with him, had this access to the Privy Council office to the point that Paul Tellier met with him, and I mean, there weren't a lot of Canadians who paid a courtesy call at Harrington Lake
No,
when Mr. Mulroney was leaving
Sir.
government.
I understand. Because you're familiar with Bearhead, you're familiar with the LAVs, you're familiar with what is being offered and exactly what Thiessen and Mr. Schreiber had in mind. Can you give us any plausible explanation why someone would think that this should be marketed internationally to Russia, China, France, and other countries? Is there any expertise here? Yes, he is. He's here.
But it's now almost 4:45.
Okay, and
you're going on and on.
Yeah.
Well, no, not Either
I
we're
understand.
going to hear Mr. Rock or we're not going to hear Mr. Rock.
We will.
We're
We
15 minutes over schedule.
Mr. Thiessen, thank you. As we discussed, our preference.
No. Don't do that.
Our preference would have been. We don't expect as many questions from Mr. Rock, and we expect.
Well, how
that
do
we
you
go for
know,
now.
sir?
Well, because
you can't just. You've taken over the meeting. Mr. Rock was scheduled to start at 4:30. It's not 4:45.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
no,
you.
not thank you. Let's end it.
Mr. Spector, do you have any final words for the committee?
Just wish you good luck in your endeavors. I think it's a very important task that you're performing, a very important service. And just to finish off, I think my sense of what was going on was that nobody was going to buy them in Canada. DND was not going to buy these things. They were dead set against it at all levels. And the only possible way to make it go would have been to find some offshore countries to buy them.
Mr. Spector, thank you kindly for appearing before us. I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes so that we can bring our next witness forward. Order, please. Our next witness is the Honourable Ellen Rock, a Privy Councillor and former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada during the time of the Mulroney Airbus settlement. He also served as Minister of Health and Minister of Industry during his 10 years as a Member of Parliament, and he subsequently served as Canada's Ambassador to the United Nations. Good afternoon, Mr. Rock, and we thank you kindly for accepting our invitation to appear before us today. Now, Mr. Rock, I expect you will recall the rules, procedures, and traditions of the House of Commons. In particular, you will recall the general expectation that witnesses appearing before committee testify in a truthful and complete manner. Do you wish to proceed under this understanding, or would you feel more comfortable being formally sworn in by the clerk of the committee?
I'm happy to be sworn in, Mr. Chairman.
Fine. I'd ask the clerk to please swear in the witness.
Left hand on, raise your right hand. The evidence I shall give on this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you, sir. Do you have any questions before we proceed?
No, Mr.
Now, I understand that you do have an opening statement, and I would invite you now to make your opening statement.
Monsieur le Président,
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I know that we've got just 45 minutes before the vote, so I will be reading my opening statement.
and the time is running. I believe the opening statement has been distributed to members of the committee, so you have it. But I prepared it in order to provide a framework within which you might ask questions about the Airbus litigation. I recall in the opening statement, Mr. Chairman, that I served as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada between November of 1993 and June of 1997. I recall as well that in the Department of Justice at the time, and I believe it's still the case today, there is something called the International Assistance Group, a group of lawyers who concern themselves with providing advice to the Government of Canada in relation to matters involving other governments, including extradition, and also where police forces in Canada cooperate with police forces elsewhere in terms of investigations. The IAG, or International Assistance Group, transmits, among other things, to foreign authorities requests by Canadian police services for assistance in investigations. The practice, at least when I was there in the 1990s, was for the Canadian Police Service in question to prepare a letter of request for the cooperation of the foreign police, bring it to the IAG. The lawyers there would ensure it was in appropriate form for the foreign government, and then it would be sent to that foreign government as a formal request by the Government of Canada for assistance. I understand from the Department of Justice that as of 1995, there were between 100 and 150 requests for assistance, or letters of request, that went overseas from Justice on behalf of police departments in Canada every year. Monsieur le Président, ces demandes étaient...
Mr. Chairman, these letters of request were always treated by the Department of Justice and the requesting police force with the utmost confidentiality because they dealt with ongoing investigations into the activities of named persons. I am told that there has never been an instance before this one in which the contents of a letter of request became public, notwithstanding that some of them reportedly named other well-known figures.
The Department of Justice in each one of these cases was not to inform or to involve the Minister of Justice or the Minister's office in any way before sending a letter of request. Because the letters requested assistance in ongoing police investigations, the Minister had no role to play. and could not properly either approve or disapprove of the letter going forward. Whether to send the letter was a matter for the police, and would be improper to have the Minister of Justice and Attorney General deciding whether or how police investigations are carried on. We all know, Mr. Chairman, that on September 29th, 1995, a letter of request went forward to the Swiss authorities on behalf of the RCMP in relation, among others, to the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. The letter sought the assistance of the Swiss authorities in an RCMP investigation. In keeping with the Justice Department's practice, I was not informed or consulted before that letter went. In fact, I first learned of it on Saturday, November 4th, 1995, when I was telephoned at home by Roger Tassé, who was one of the lawyers for Mr. Mulroney. After he briefly told me the nature of his call and what he wanted to talk about, I asked that he speak with my Deputy Minister, which he did. And then the following Monday, which was the 6th of November, I read the letter of request for the first time. The officials at Justice recommended that the matter be referred to the RCMP, on whose behalf the request was sent. Mr. Mulroney's lawyers wanted the letter withdrawn, but I was informed by Justice and RCMP officials that it could not be withdrawn because it had already been acted upon. It had been sent overseas. It had been taken by the Canadian consular officials to the Swiss bank, and indeed copies had been given to the account holders, Mr. Schreiber and Mr. Moores. It was also a concern that if an effort was made to withdraw it, we might draw more attention to it than otherwise, because, remember, during this period it still had not been in the Financial Post. But the Department of Justice did send a follow-up letter to the same Swiss authorities, making 2 points. First of all, emphasizing that everything in the letter of request was in the nature of an allegation only. There had been no findings, there were only an investigation, and that the letter must be read as being comprised of allegations. And secondly, underlying the crucial importance of respecting scrupulously the confidentiality of these communications. That letter was sent over on the 14th of November to the Swiss authorities. Mr. Chairman, on November 18th, 1995, the Financial Post published a story about the letter of request, quoting at length from its contents. And to this day, subject to what I'll say in a few moments about expert evidence that the government obtained on the question, there's really been no explanation as to how the Financial Post obtained that letter of request. Monsieur le Président, ce même 18 novembre.
Mr. Chair, on that same day, November 18, 1995, Mr. Mulroney's lawyers called a press conference in Montreal to announce that they were launching a libel action against the Government of Canada and the RCMP. And they were seeking $50 million in damages. The government and the RCMP defended that action, and from time to time, the parties made efforts to try to resolve the litigation, short of going to trial. As part of the litigation proceedings, Mr. Mulroney was examined under oath and was asked questions about various relevant matters. The answers that Mr. Mulroney gave under oath led the government to conclude that he had not had any dealings with Mr. Schreiber.
As the government and the RCMP prepared for trial, we relied upon two defenses in responding to the lawsuit. First, that any communication by or on behalf of the Government of Canada, so long as it was in good faith for a proper public purpose, was protected by either absolute or qualified privilege, so that no civil action could be brought in respect of it. And we had expert evidence to support that position. The second defense was that none of the defendants actually published the libel. This defense arose from the fact that the letter as served on Mr. Schreiber was in the German language. In the days after it was served on him, someone arranged for lawyers in Switzerland to translate the letter into English. We called it the Bloom translation. We retained an expert who prepared a report that we intended to rely upon at trial to prove that the version of the letter published in the Financial Post was the Bloom translation. Our expert identified what she called a linguistic fingerprint that demonstrated the link. And if we could establish in the courtroom that the reporter was working from the Bloom translation, that would suggest that persons other than the defendants had published the libel. Shortly before trial, Mr. Chairman, the Department of Justice learned that a member of the RCMP had disclosed to a third party sometime in late 1995 the fact that the letter of request included the name of Mr. Mulroney. Counsel advised me that this unauthorized disclosure, if entered into evidence at the trial, would destroy our first defense, namely the defense of privilege, and weaken our second defense, which had to do with the publication. In those circumstances, I instructed counsel to reopen negotiations to see whether the litigation could be settled. And those negotiations resulted in the settlement agreement that Solicitor General Herb Gray and I announced on January 7th, 1997. Mr. Chairman, there have been suggestions from time to time from the outset in this matter that the RCMP investigation was initiated either by me or other political figures for partisan or vindictive reasons. The settlement agreement, which was personally signed by Mr. Mulroney, sets out his position on that question. In paragraph numbered 8 of the agreement, the parties acknowledge that the procedure used in sending the letter of request in this case was the same as that followed on numerous occasions under both the Mulroney and the Chrétien governments. In paragraph numbered 9 of the settlement agreement, the parties acknowledge that the RCMP on its own initiated the Airbus investigation, that I was not involved in the decision to initiate it, and that before November 4th, 1995, I was not aware of the letter of request. Let me close simply by saying, Mr. Chairman, that although the Justice Department had a long history of sending letters like this in language such as that used in this case, I think we all learned from this instance, and certainly it was my belief, that using language which is conclusory when you're talking about really allegations is wrong. And so I directed, after I read the letter of request in this case, that the practice in the Department of Justice change. And it changed. And I also appointed the Honourable Alan Goodman, who is a retired Justice of the Court of Appeal for Ontario, to look into the whole of the procedure involving letters of request. And he made a report with recommendations in early 1997 that I accepted and put into place all of his recommendations. Monsieur le Président, j'espère que cet aperçu.
Mr. Chairman, I hope that you will find that brief summary of the Justice Department's involvement in the Airbus litigation to be useful. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
That's enough for the first round. So we're going to have Mr. Murphy, Madame Lavallee, Mr. Martin, and Mr. Van Kesteren. Okay? Mr. Murphy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Zabo. Thank you, Mr. Rock, for being here. Mr. Rock, you've mentioned that you and Solicitor General Herb Gray announced the settlement, or the intention of the government to settle this matter on January 6th, 1997. I'm going to throw some dates at you. It wasn't until October 6th, 1997, that through the offices of Justice Gold, that a final settlement agreement paying over $2 million to Mr. Mulroney, 1.4 for legal fees, and $587,000 for public relations fees was actually entered into. The question I have for you is either at the time of the January press conference or the October actual settlement, or in fact the payments over 1997, did you become aware of the cash payments to Mr. Mulroney of somewhere between $225,000 and $300,000?
No.
Mr. Rock, you are no stranger to a courtroom and court proceedings. Law Society of Upper Canada, Treasurer, Bencher, very highly respected in the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario. You know what I mean by a pleading?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. In Mr. Mulroney's pleading, he said in part, his lawyer said on his behalf, you know how that works, that he had never had, directly or indirectly, any bank account either in Switzerland or any other foreign country. He's since admitted to having a safety deposit box in various locations. But more importantly, he says he has never received any of the alleged payments in any form from any person named in the request for assistance. And I don't need to remind you that in the request for assistance, Mr. Schreiber's name is there throughout. At the discovery, where your lawyers, the Government of Canada's lawyers, concluded that Mr. Mulroney had not had any dealings with Mr. Schreiber, Mr. Mulroney, in fact, said, "I had never had any dealings with him." That's a quote under oath at a discovery in aid of pleadings given by Mr. Mulroney. This discovery was in April of '96. The discoveries go on to paint the picture of the relationship with Mr. Schreiber as something just in passing. He had an interest in German unification. He was a German businessman, and he had coffee with Mr. Mulroney a few times in various places. That's the theme or the tenor of the discovery transcript. Did you review any of the discovery transcripts, or were you fully briefed on what happened at the examinations for discovery in April of '96?
I believe there was press coverage by the day as they took place, and I was briefed by our lawyers with respect to the main points on discovery, so I was generally aware of what was asked and what was answered.
We just heard from Mr. Spector, and it was an interesting quote that he formed the impression that Mr. Schreiber and Mr. Mulroney had more than a relationship in passing. He also said that certain people have used Airbus, the Airbus file, to give vague answers. Would you consider, knowing what you know now, that Mr. Mulroney accepted between $225,000 and $300,000 from Mr. Schreiber, would you consider it vague to say that I had never had any dealings with him?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the transcript speaks for itself. I'm not going to interpret what Mr. Mulroney said on that occasion. What I can tell you is that I guess I can say two things. First of all, as I mentioned in my opening statement, certainly the government concluded from the testimony given by Mr. Mulroney that he'd not had dealings with Mr. Schreiber, period. And second, I was surprised, I think like a lot of Canadians, I was very surprised to learn subsequently, I think in 2003, that there had been payments from Mr. Schreiber to Mr. Mulroney.
Well, given that you know that now, would you, if you were in the position now, and I bet you're happy you aren't, but would you still recommend that the government enter into the over $2 million settlement with Mr. Mulroney?
Mr. Chairman, it's difficult to be categorical when you're looking back 10 years ago and assuming that the facts of a case are different, speculating on the outcome. But I can say that had there been disclosure at the time of the cash payments by Mr. Schreiber to Mr. Mulroney and the circumstances in which they were made, it would have had a dramatic effect on that litigation, would have had a profound effect. Questions would have been asked to follow up. Documents would have been requested, including bank accounts, safety deposit box records, perhaps tax returns.
Yes, so in short, you would not have authorized that settlement in January 6th at the if you had known of the $225,000 payments.
Let me say that if you assume that the cash payments had been disclosed, I do not believe that the recommendation would have been to settle on those terms, which does not mean that it might not have settled on some other terms. But I don't believe the recommendation would have been to settle on those terms in the face of the facts we now know.
Do you believe that the RCMP did not know of these cash payments at the time settlement negotiations were entered into? Mr. Spector certainly feels that the RCMP did not know about the cash when they shut down the investigation.
I have no idea what they knew. Certainly they never raised it with Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray never raised it with me, I should say.
And as far as the RCMP investigation going on, did the RCMP continue, to your knowledge, the investigation after the settlement was entered into?
Yes, I believe they did. I think, in fact, one of the terms of the settlement agreement provided that it would have no effect on the RCMP's sole decision and discretion whether to continue the investigation until they felt that it had been concluded.
Finally, Mr. Rock, memoranda suggest, these are very contemporary memoranda, suggest, coming from the Justice Department, that they considered trying to get the settlement money back when they learned of these payments. And as a former Justice Minister, and a mighty good one I might add, do you find it surprising that briefings were not held on this topic? Briefings were not had by the current ministers of justice under this regime, Ministers Nicholson or Taves? Do you find it surprising they weren't briefed on this attempt to get back the settlement funds?
Well, I'm afraid I don't know what happened, what they were briefed about and what they weren't briefed about. I know that there is a procedure that one can invoke to ask the court to set aside an agreement, particularly a settlement agreement, if you take the position that it was obtained under something less than full disclosure. But I'm not here to give legal advice to the Justice Department, which they don't need, or political advice to the government of the day, which I'm sure they would not accept.
S'il vous plaît.
J'ai séparé mon temps avec Maître Ménard.
I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Memena. Thanks for being here. Mr. Rock, for coming to answer a question. I'm going to ask you some questions that seem a bit repetitive, but I would like to ask them in French and to get some answers in French to make quite sure about what I'm hearing. In your presentation, you say in paragraph 12, in terms, Mr. Romani testified under oath, and questions were asked on various subjects, and that he had no dealings with Mr. Schreiber. I looked up the word in English, the word for incité in French. I would have thought the word convince. Mr. Mulroney's answers convinced the RCMP. I'm wondering why they ended the investigation at that point. So how can you explain such an erroneous conclusion? Given the information we have, there were 3 payments by Mr. Schreiber at the time that the RCMP stopped its investigation. What I said in my statement is that at the time, given Mr. Mulroney's answers, we, as participants in the civil litigation, we concluded he said that he had no dealings with Mr. Schreiber. We accepted that. We accepted Mr. Mulroney's testimony. He's a former Prime Minister of Canada who spent 9 years in the Prime Minister's office. He was sworn in as well as a witness, so we assumed that he had answered the question properly. And that's why I said in my statement today that it led us to conclude. It led the government to conclude at the time that he had not had any dealings with Mr. Schreiber. That's what our conclusion was, given Mr. Mulroney's answers in April 1996. Would you say that the RCMP should have gone beyond Mr. Mulroney's testimony and really investigated in the field as to what happened? Well, it's not up to me to say what the RCMP should be doing. It was Mr. Herb Gray, the Solicitor General of Canada, who was in charge of the RCMP. He reported on it to the House of Commons. But in my view, I'm aware of the fact that the RCMP continued the investigation after the settlement of our civil matter. They carried on until 2003, I believe, when they announced, we're now going to close this matter. So they did carry on, despite the settlement. Do you regret the $2.1 million settlement now? Well, I would just say that it's difficult from this position in 2008 to look back and to imagine what we would have done had we had the information we now have. But as I said to Mr. Murphy, I'm quite sure that if we had had information about the payments from Mr. Schreiber to Mr. Mulroney, if that information had been known at the time, that would have had a huge impact on the civil case. And in my opinion, we would have not had the recommendation to settle in these terms. Mr. Rock, I understand that this type of letter of request is something that has to stay far away from the minister, that he shouldn't be informed, he must not in fact be informed about that type of police information. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Now, you've seen it since. You've read it since. This letter that was sent to the Swiss government. Were you struck by the fact as well that as things evolved, that among the first people to be informed about all the doubts that the police had about some individuals, that these individuals would be the first ones informed, that they would be given a copy of the letter? What I was told at the time was that you have to give notice to the people who held the bank accounts in Switzerland. In other words, if the RCMP, through the government, asked for access to records involved related to a particular Swiss bank account, then the holder of that account had to be informed and give them a copy of the letter of request. And that's why Mr. Schreiber and Mr. Moores received a copy of the letter of request. So those people were informed about the investigation, and they had time to cause to disappear some of the accounting, particularly if we're talking about cash. Well, they definitely got notice. I have no knowledge of what they did afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rock. Mr. Rock, I think I speak for a lot of Canadians when I say that we want our money back, and that's certainly one of the reasons that we're pushing this issue now, because Brian Mulroney sued the Government of Canada for $50 million because we implied he had taken money from Karl-Heinz Schreiber. We now know he did take money from Karl-Heinz Schreiber, and I take you at your word that you probably wouldn't have recommended a settlement had you known that then. I can't understand, though, maybe you can help me understand it, why did we send letters of apology to Schreiber and to Moores, as well as to Brian Mulroney it isn't part of the settlement agreement. I've read it very thoroughly. But the Government of Canada felt necessary to apologize to Schreiber and to Frank Moores in the same context that they were apologizing to Mr. Mulroney. And the last thing, I'll ask you to answer that, but the last thing I'll say, because we have so little time, is a lot of people feel that you folded too early. And a lot of people feel that the Liberals were eager to get rid of this investigation, because if they dug too deep, they would learn that Schreiber was meeting with Andre Ouellette, Schreiber was meeting with Doug Young, Schreiber was meeting with Alan J. McEachern. Schreiber was right into the Liberal Party, just as he was right into the Conservative Party at the time. Now, perhaps you'd like to address that too. A lot of people generally feel you folded too soon, and it was partly so the Liberal Party wouldn't get damaged by a proper investigation.
Let me address both questions. First of all, in relation to the letters to Schreiber and Moores, they were sent as a matter of logic and a matter of law. The advice I had from the department, with which I agreed, was that because the gist of the reason we apologized to Mr. Mulroney was the language used in the letter of request, and if you read that language, you'll see that it's conclusory. We're used to language that says it's alleged that someone did something. It's alleged that such and such took place. But this language, while sometimes it says that, goes much farther than that, and it asserts as a matter of fact that there was criminal activity. And that's why an apology was given. It is a
little galling for Canadians to be apologizing to Karl-Heinz Schreiber for inconveniencing him. Believe me, that's...
If I can just conclude that question, that answer to your question, Mr. Martin, the same language was used for the other two as well. And in fact, I believe one of them at the time had commenced a lawsuit also. So it was felt it was in the public interest to avoid further payments to get that done. Let me answer your second question. We were ready to go to trial on January 2nd, 1997. We'd lined up expert witnesses. We'd given notice of the experts' reports. We had no fewer than 3 or 4 lawyers ready to go. We'd got the documents lined up. We'd subpoenaed witnesses. We believed we had good defenses in law. I've described what they were. That night, I was told that in the fall of '95, an RCMP member had disclosed to a third party that Mr. Mulroney's name was in the letter of request. And I was also advised by our counsel, and I agreed, that when that became public at the trial, it would significantly weaken our defense. I was ready to go to trial, and we were ready to rely on those defenses until they were taken away from us. And in those circumstances, we went back to the negotiating table to make the best deal we could.
I understand that. Did you ever meet with Karl-Heinz Schreiber when you were a minister?
No. Never met the man.
Did Marc Lalonde ever represent Schreiber to you or other members of your cabinet, to your knowledge?
No.
Lobbying on behalf of Schreiber?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Mulcair has a question.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Rock, le temps presse un peu, alors.
Time is moving along, so I'll go directly to my point. You said earlier that you didn't think, that you had no idea whether the RCMP knew about the cash payments from Mr. Schreiber to Mr. Mulroney. You said that Mr. Gray never raised it with you. But you were the one who had to decide whether or not to settle in the Mulroney matter. So what did you do actively to find out where the file was at? How did you look into the file? Did you ask the question? What do we know? What does the RCMP know before you made your decision, before you decided to give $2.1 million in taxpayers' money to Mr. Mulroney? The decision to settle was a decision made by the government. Mr. Gray, as the Solicitor General, and I shared the responsibility for responding in court in this action. Did we do any investigating ourselves? No. We asked the legal counsel representing us in court. We're getting a little bit far away from the point. I want to come back to my question. You're the first officer responsible for the administration of justice in Canada. You're about to write out a check for $2.1 million to a former prime minister for the pain and suffering caused to him by associating him with Mr. Schreiber. Now we know the truth. But what did you do to actively to find out what the situation was before you did that? Now you seem to be backing off. You say it was a decision made by the government, but it was your decision. It was my recommendation after I got an analysis from the lawyers involved in the file for the government. What did we do? We defended the action. We asked Mr. Mulroney questions. We accepted his testimony as a former prime minister of the country. But what did the RCMP tell you? You must have asked the RCMP some questions, did you not? Well, I'm sure that Mr. Gray, like myself, we looked at the facts before the court to determine whether or not we would succeed. Once I was told that a member of the RCMP revealed something. Well, that's an unproved allegation. No, that's a reality before the court. But you were the minister. You made the recommendation, Mr. Rock. Did you or did you not ask the simple question? But what does the RCMP know about this? Mr. Mulcair, my concern as the Attorney General for Canada and the Minister of Justice, the person in charge with Mr. Gray for defending the government's interest in this civil suit, well, my concern had to do with the opinion of our lawyers as to whether or not we had a good response to the action. Up to January 2nd, the lawyer said, yes, we did. And after that, after finding out that an officer of the RCMP had revealed the information to a third party, they said, no, we didn't have a good case. So that's why we settled. I'm sorry, Mr. Mulcair. Time's up.
Question session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rock, for appearing before us this afternoon. So while you were Justice Minister, we've established all this. You had commenced an investigation into about Airbus purchase, about Air Canada and the Cape Breton Bearhead project proposal. You said at that time, or you said just a few minutes ago, that had you have known what you know today, that you wouldn't have pulled the plug on the investigation. But I would remind you that in April of 2003, the RCMP admitted that after an exhaustive investigation, the RCMP concluded that no wrongdoing involving Airbus or the Bearhead project existed. They said, and I quote, after an I should have said, I quoted that, investigation in Canada and abroad, the RCMP has concluded its investigation and allegations of wrongdoing involving the MBB helicopters, Thyssen and Airbus. Okay. The RCMP has now concluded that the remaining allegations cannot be substantiated and that no charges will be laid. I think that's important because I want to go to a series of questions that relate to this committee's mandate. Do you have, sir, any evidence to offer this committee of any wrongdoing by any public official regarding the Bearhead project?
No, but may I just quarrel with your premise, sir, just for a moment? No. I didn't start an investigation, the RCMP did.
I understand.
And we didn't pull the plug on the investigation, we settled the lawsuit. With those two clarifications, my answer to your question is no.
Point well taken. Do you have any evidence to offer this committee of any wrongdoing by any public official regarding the consulting agreement between Brian Mulroney and Karl-Heinz Schreiber?
No.
Do you have any evidence to offer this committee of any wrongdoing by any public official regarding the circulation of correspondence from the Privy Council office to the Prime Minister's office, with particular emphasis on the correspondence sent by Karl-Heinz Schreiber to the current Prime Minister?
No.
Do you have any evidence to offer this committee of any wrongdoing by any public official regarding the Airbus purchase by Air Canada?
No.
Given that the settlement of our government reached with Mr. Mulroney in '97 was specifically tied to defamatory statements made about him in regards to the Airbus scandal, and I guess this question's been asked again, but I want to ask it, or it's been asked before, but I want to ask it again. Would the now public knowledge that Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Schreiber had a separate consulting agreement unconnected to Airbus have given you reason to reevaluate the file at that time? And if so, why?
As I mentioned in answer to an earlier question, I don't believe there would have been a recommendation to settle on these terms had we known about that cash. Now, it might have settled for other reasons, because as you've said, the settlement was all about the language used, and that hasn't changed. But I think it's a question of what terms it would have settled on. And I think had we known about the cash and the circumstances in which it was paid, it would have had a very significant effect on the litigation. One point, if I may, this case was all about reputation. Mr. Mulroney complained that the language used affected his reputation. But the disclosure of the cash payments also had that effect. And had that disclosure been in '96 or '97, before this case was settled, we would have been dealing with a very different set of facts. And either we would have pursued questions, as this committee is doing, about documents, about records, about witnesses, to find out where the trail led, or we might have settled the case because the language was inappropriate. But as I say, perhaps that settlement would have been on very different terms. Maybe there wouldn't have been a payment of costs, and maybe there wouldn't have been other terms that were agreed to. But we're speculating now, but I'm doing my best to answer your question.
Thank you. Okay, I want to go back to that letter of request that was sent by the Justice Department in September 25 of '95. When did you personally become aware of the letter to the Swiss authorities and the letter that ultimately came about, the 2.1?
On the 4th of November, a Saturday, in 1995, I was telephoned at home by Roger Tassé. That was when I first learned of the letter.
Okay, why didn't you act right away? And squash that thing so that we wouldn't have had the exposure? Why was there a delay?
We looked into that. When I say we, I met with the Deputy Minister or senior officials on the Monday, the 6th of November. I read the letter for myself. The request by Mr. Mulroney's lawyers was to withdraw it. When I asked about that potential course of action, I was told that, in effect, it's already spent. It's been acted upon. It's been served on the bank. It's been served on the account holders. And don't forget that on the 6th of November, that's before the Financial Post had published the article, the effort then was to keep this as confidential as possible. And the concern was, if an effort was made to withdraw it, that by going back through the channels and doing such a thing, we might draw more attention to it than if we just remained silent and instead sent a letter to the Swiss, a second letter, which we did, making 2 points. Number one, those are only allegations. And number two, please respect the confidentiality of this communication scrupulously.
Now, I got to ask you this question.
Pardon?
I have to ask you this question. Now, was there pressure within the caucus that possibly, hey, this is something we've got to, and for that reason that letter wasn't pulled or acted on quickly?
No. I don't recall any discussion in caucus about this. Certainly, what motivated me was doing the best I could in the interests of all parties. The government, Mr. Mulroney's lawyers had a complaint about the language used. The RCMP wanted to maintain their investigation and not have that undermined. And so we were working on that, sending follow-up letters to the Swiss, looking into various steps we could take, when on the 18th of November, the top blew off because the Financial Post published a lot of the letter, and Mr. Mulroney's lawyers announced the litigation.
Who, sir, leaked the letter to the, two questions then. Who leaked the letter to the Swiss authorities? And as Justice Minister, who was ultimately responsible for the $2.1 million charges that relate to the Canadian taxpayers?
Who leaked the letter to the Swiss authorities? It wasn't leaked, it was sent over, and the protocol is that a Canadian consular official then provides a copy to the Swiss authorities and to the bank and to the account holders. So that wasn't a leak, that was a delivery. Question is, who leaked the letter to the Financial Post? As I mentioned, we had an expert witness who was going to swear that the version that was referred to in the Financial Post was the version that was translated in Switzerland for someone after we sent it over in the German language. So we were going to establish that it wasn't the government that leaked it to the Financial Post. In answer to your second question, who is responsible for the $2.1 million? The government acknowledged that that letter should not have been sent in that language. Didn't apologize for the investigation. There's nothing wrong with police can decide who to investigate. It was the language used that was the essential harm here, and it was for that reason we apologized and agreed to pay costs.
Colleagues, the bills have now studied, so we'll wrap it up now. Just one question for you, Mr. Rock. On page 116 of Mr. Mulroney's Day 1 testimony in his examination for discovery, he said, and I quote, "I never had any dealings with him," referring to Mr. Schreiber. Of course, it's now come out in these hearings, some other details, but on November the 10th, I believe, of last year, he had an interview with the Globe and Mail in which he admitted to receiving the 3 payments totaling $225,000 or $300,000. That is a direct contradiction to his sworn testimony in discovery that he made in a public pronouncement. Is there any recourse to reopen the settlement based on the fact that he voluntarily disclosed that he in fact did have business dealings when in fact at discovery he said he did not?
As I've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, there is a procedure by which lawyers can move before the court to set aside an agreement based upon failure to make full disclosure. Whether it should take place in this case is a matter for the Justice Department in terms of their legal analysis, and of course a question for the government of the day as to whether they wish to do so. I can comment about the legal procedure, but I leave to others the question whether the Justice Department has its own advice and whether this government is prepared to do that.
I thank you kindly, Mr. Rock. Mr. Rock, colleagues, Mr. Rock has agreed to respond to any other questions we have in writing. If you have any further questions for Mr. Rock, then please submit them to the clerk. We'll forward them on to Mr. Rock. And no, the witness agreed to that.
Well, but we never asked him.
I did.
Well, you had no right to ask me.
Well, thank you.
There you go.
And,
No, not thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just can't go.
No,
Once again, you're just going on your way and taking over
Thank you.
the way you
Order.
see fit.
Yeah.
God bless
Thank you, Mr. Tilson. Mr. Rock, thank you again. Our next meeting is next Thursday at 3:30. We have Luc Lavoie and François Martin. We are now adjourned.
Thank you.